You are at war with yourself and likely don't realize it. Your thoughts, beliefs, habits, and actions often sabotage you. Are they helping you overcome adversity or setting you up for failure? To win this battle, you must connect with your inner warrior. We all have a warrior within us, one that strengthens our resolve and helps us to rise to meet life's challenges. If you're just surviving rather than thriving, then it's time to embrace the warrior archetype, live the warrior ethos, and ascend. If you are a veteran, first responder, or someone looking to take charge of your life, find your tribe, and then be the hero of your own story, this podcast is for you. Join Mike Kinney and Matt Hastings, two retired U.S. Army officers who served in U.S. Army Special Operations and Army Aviation units, as they share with you optimal performance practices they learned in their time with the Military and Warriors Ascent, a 501c3 nonprofit that helps veterans and warriors with PTS.
Well, hello, everyone. Welcome back. Season 2 of the Warriors Ascent podcast with your host, Mike Kenny, Matt Hastings.
Airborne.
Air salt. Two retired Army officers. We've got a good session today. But let me set the stage by asking the following, right? So we've all had days where something was amiss. You know, we've all felt like that at one time or another. Sometimes it's hard to put your finger on it. Something's not quite right. It might not be outright despondence or despair, but you're not feeling quite like yourself. Maybe it's languishing, you feel flat, somewhat apathetic, right? So whether your focus is healing, right, getting back on track, or high performance, taking things to the next level, it's important to have a system that gets you there, that gets you where it is that you want to be, right? So what we'll present today is a part diagnostic tool, right? Part prescription. The Warrior Operating System is a rubric that we're going to use to both identify the root cause of what might be ailing you and then also a potential remedy for the issues that you're contending with. So with that said...
What did you say, Mike? We're going to systemize the warrior.
That's right. We're going to operationalize. We're going to operationalize the warrior. Operationalize excellence. So that's important. So the Warrior Operating System, I say 1.0 and 2.0. So last season, we talked a lot about what it is that we do at Warriors Ascent, right? The healing aspects of what it is that we do, in terms of healing and high performance to get people back on track. So that would be the 1.0. Very important, foundational and fundamental, no doubt. Absolutely. And in order to perform at any level, you still need to do those things right. And that one anecdote I told you about in CQB, what makes us who are the basics, right? So you've got to do that, no doubt. But I'll say 2.0, maybe a little bit more advanced in that, we'll talk about some constructs that we didn't mention necessarily in that first season, but are really geared towards getting you to that next level. But before we go down that road, let's start out by asking, why have a system or process? Why is that important? And I'll start with another, not so much an anecdote, but a vignette or call it whatever. So it's from a book with Winning in Mind, a guy named Lanny Basham. So he was an Olympic gold medalist, marksman, rifle shooter, I believe. And his story is just very basically, he's in his gold medal match and he completely decompensates. And I think he fails to medal or medals far less than his potential, much to his chagrin. And at that point, he's like, what went wrong? He did the root cause analysis and was like, oh my God, I'm never going to let that happen again. So they're, forward, very process oriented. So fast forward into, his future, he wins the gold medal. He finally gets it all together and then goes so far as to, write a book, obviously with winning in mind, and then based on his coaching program and process. So he tells the story of a golfer who, same thing, was just not living his full potential. And Lanny is coaching him and tells him, among many things, but one of the main things is don't be focused on outcomes, be focused on the process, because that is all that you can affect. Much like when we say, control the controllable, don't worry about the past, or ruminate on the past, don't focus on the future, control what you can control, which is the present. And he's pretty much the same thing. So the story goes, this golfer's 18th hole, he's got a 30-foot putt to win it. He doesn't know that, right? Because he's so focused. He puts this in, wins $1 million. His caddy comes up to him, shakes his hand. And to hear the story, he's like, he thought it was just a formality, like, hey, good putt. It wasn't until his wife ran up to him, give him a big hug. He looks at her and he goes, did I win? So that guy was so process focused.
Definitely not outcome focused.
Right. That he was even, I mean, sure, it was in his mind, but that was ancillary or tangential to, the task at hand. And as a consequence, he fared well. He won that $1 million prize, which is great. So I would submit to you, that is why you need a system and a process. And that's why, at least for our part, I think that, our rubric, call it cheesy, call it whatever, but the Warrior Operating System is our attempt to, I'll say, codify best practices, processes, mental models, rubrics, call them whatever, into a framework in which we can operationalize the warriors. So we say all the time, just real fast, we say all the time, hey, embrace the warrior archetype and live the warrior ethos. You might ask, well, hey, that's great. How in God's name do you do that?
Yeah,
where do I begin? And I'd say the Warrior Operating System for our part is an attempt to do exactly that and lay out that roadmap. So tell me about how that relates to your time in the military.
What I do think is you use a system because things you're doing are complex. And if you miss something, you could have catastrophic effect or outcome. So in order to ensure, for instance, starting up a Black Hawk helicopter, you'd be surprised at how many switches and buttons and circuit breakers and knobs are in there. And, we use a checklist, and it's very, very, very rigid on what we do. And it's called call and response. One guy just says one thing, another guy has a rehearsed response each time.
Right.
And even the crew chief who's walking around the outside of the aircraft, we get to the point where we know this flow so well that if something just is off, everybody just instantly perks their ears and something's not right in the system. And what that does is just, again, takes something super complex, breaks it down into, like we say, break it down like Barney. And maybe I'm dating myself again.
The purple dinosaur guy, right?
The purple dinosaur guy.
Yes.
I love you.
Make it Barney, simple and stupid.
Okay. To make it easy, complex become easy. And it's just I think it's a pretty logical thing to do.
Well, you bring up a lot of great points, aside from the fact that you've made it, I'll say, somewhat formulaic, but that checklist, I'll bring up the checklist manifesto by the, surgeon Atul Gawande. And we talked about this earlier, where he brought that to, the hospital that he worked at. I can't remember if it's Mount Sinai. It's inconsequential. But bottom line is he inculcated this checklist system into their, I'll say, surgical procedures and significantly reduced the amount of infection, complication, or even deaths in some instance. And you might think to yourself, these are surgeons at the top of their game, highly educated. What do they need a checklist for? They should all know that. Much like yourself, you've 5,000 hours in the helicopter. It's like, what do you need a checklist for? You've got 5,000 hours, and I'm sure you'll attest to the fact that no, it keeps me honest, it keeps me on point, and it helps me check to make sure that I've not missed something.
Systems also don't care what my emotions are or my affect. So if I'm flat and lethargic, I still have the same system. Or if I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm like my heart's beating, I got blood rushing because I'm in an emergency situation, I still have the same system. And that's all I've ever practiced. So it levels the playing field, if you will. And we have, the other thing we do is battle drills inside of, crews have them, staff has them inside of a tactical operations center or whatever, so that everybody knows right now what to do. Let's say a mortar attacks your base, and rather than going, what do we do? Everybody knows exactly their actions to do. So those systems, I think, it just takes chaos and turns it into, systematic. I don't know.
It puts it almost
I don't work any other good way.
Autopilot.
Yeah.
You bring up another great point, which is in chaos, right? When you're innervated, you can refer to that checklist and it keeps you on track. So in circumstances where, hey, you're not motivated, you're tired, right? You at least have a handrail with which to consult, right? And say, okay, hey, let me make sure I'm not missing something, right? Or the opposite, you are just so, either anxious or, anything, you're just excited, whatever it might be, alarmed. It's, again, another handrail that you can refer to say, oh my God, hey, I'm like going out of my mind. All right, let me make sure that I've not missed something. I would say for our purposes, same deal. So when I say part diagnostic tool, and we'll tee this up shortly and kind of explicate it, we won't go through all of it. It'll just be, an intro in terms of, what the tool is about. And I'll say some of the, the facets of it are. But, in the end, why I find it useful is we've all had instances where I'm just not feeling right, as I kind of mentioned. What do you call it? Lead measures or lag measures in the project management world. The lead measures being, hey, these are the things that I need to do day to day. The lag measures are the outcomes, the results, right? So objectives and key results, there's a multitude of frameworks. But if you can't establish, I'll say, a causal linkage between the things that you need to do with the outcomes that you're going for, you're going to be hard pressed to diagnose, hey, where am I going wrong? Where am I deficient? How come I'm not realizing the outcomes that I'm hoping for? And without, again, a framework or a system or something, you don't even know where to begin. You do your root cause analysis and go, I don't know, I'm just not feeling it, or I just can't get results, or I keep having issues with my wife or my coworkers and I'm blowing up, or I have got no energy, or I can't focus, a multitude of things. And, hey, the intent behind the framework, the operating system, is to at least give you a tool to say, all right, hey, let me see if I can't figure out what's amiss and what I need to do to remedy that situation. So
that's what you're looking for, right? Tools and, and a method to use those tools to help myself when necessary.
That's exactly it. I mean, it's got to be actionable, and we can sit around and pontificate and speak theory all day long.
Theory's great.
But if it's not useful, right?
Give me on the some hands-on, right?
Exactly. Theory and practice, right? So, boom. Right. So this is I'll say a simplification. I'll show the larger framework, and I know it seems like a lot, like, oh my God, what is that? But so we've talked about mind, body, and soul previously, and that's, I'll say, our mantra at Warriors Ascent, very holistic approach, right? I'll say next level, we talk about prudentia, right? And we spoke to that, I think, either in the pilot or the second episode. A virtue, right, that you live up to, right? Hey, prudent decision-making, sagacity, whatever it might be, where you're going to make the sound and timely decision, right? So reasoning, logic, all of that. Body, fortitudo, right? What we're going for there, obviously, resilience, taking care of yourself, self-care, but, being tough, being gritty, all of that, and what it is that you need to do in terms of self-care practices and things of that nature to make sure that you're resilient, and that you've got, the capacity to endure and achieve your objectives.
Man, and that's the one that's easier of the three.
You think so?
In my mind, all you got to do is eat the right food, miss the wrong foods, sleep properly. It's like, I think that one I feel like is one you can do something about.
I'd say it's more straightforward. There are, I'll say, clear lines and practices mostly. But as Clausewitz says, right, war is simple, but in war, even the simplest things are difficult, right? It's the same thing. The concept of working out is pretty straightforward. There are a multitude of workouts and modalities. You can do CrossFit, you can do high intensity training, you can do P90X, whatever it is. But showing up every day and having that commitment, that's the hard part. So simple in concept. Diet, same thing. You can subscribe to a multitude of diets out there, but you've got to do it. Not eat the crap.
Yeah, exactly.
And follow that guidance. That's the hard part. Breathing, meditating, recovering, those are, I'll say, not quite next level, but you get the eat, move, sleep right, then you can get to that next level.
I think that's what I mean is maybe it's a bigger impact that you can, that then helps you out with, the soul and the mind portions.
Right.
I don't know.
No, absolutely. So soul or gravitas, right? So gravitas, if we mention, gravity. So meaning, hey, the gravity of the situation, the weight, right? So you can associate commitment, dignity, solemnity, like seriousness, purposefulness, all of that, with that particular virtue. So esteem, belongingness, and self-actualization. So very important, right? So you get the mental constructs, right? You're fortified, you're ready to go. But in terms of esteem and accomplishment, self-efficacy is, one of the clinical terms, the ability, and the notion that you can, in fact, achieve the outcomes and objectives that you desire. A lot of people feel disempowered. So beyond, I'll say, an inability to do that, they can't even conceptualize of being able to do that. That's where self-efficacy lies. But what does that look like day to day? That achievement, which is important. Belongingness, so community, a sense of tribe, all of that. And we hear all the time, our participants in many ways are lacking in that area, especially our veterans, but I would submit to you first responders as well, especially if they've separated from the service or law enforcement or the fire department. They no longer feel that they're with their tribe, the people that have their backs, that same sense of purpose, the virtues, the ethos, shared experiences is the other one, right? So, we speak to that a little bit, going out and seeking that out, being with people like that. And then, quite frankly, clearly defining what that is, right? And a lot of people, this is what I mean about the system as a diagnostic tool. You put that into words, kind of even like, that emotional wheel that Anna, one of our clinicians who's, CBT, DBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, dialectical behavior therapy. But the power of that wheel is putting into words, like, the emotions that you're feeling. And it sounds like, okay, I don't need a dictionary. But when you point out, hey, these are the words that describe, how it is that you're feeling, and being able to very precisely articulate that with nuance, because, anger is different than being annoyed. That is different than annoyance or guilt or shame.
They all feel a little bit the same.
Or agitation. It's pretty close. They're all probably pretty much derived from anger, but there's some subtleties there and there's some nuance. And that's kind of important to know, because unless you know that and unless you can express it, you'd be hard pressed to really, I'll say, remedy that. Right. So that's where that
was one of those things that I thought was a small issue that became like a big deal for me, because definition of words mean a lot. And if you, proper definitions of those things, like the difference between shame and guilt, it's like, wow. I mean, it feels a lot the same, but they like are cousins of each other. So you're not even working on the right thing, unless you know what you're after. How can you define what that emotion is? So I really appreciated that exercise. And I've seen other huge lists of emotions, like 100 different emotions, and you're thinking, geez, that's a lot of emotions that are written down with a nuance about that being different than another one. It's interesting.
No, that's true. And then you find, not to go too far down this road, but, in terms of emotion, a lot of guys, especially alpha males, will go to, the anger piece, because that's kind of, and sometimes, to be fair, that anger stems from maybe even fear, like fear of loss. Hey, failure. Or, hey, this person's trying to take something from me. Or, I'm being disrespected, or, am I going to lose something? I'm losing respect, reputation. Again, coming to terms with that, it's relatively important.
It is.
So that is the entire rubric, quite an eye chart. So we're not going to go line by line about, through this, but I just kind of want to present that as the model, quite frankly, that lays the framework for much of what we'll talk about this season. So call this a roadmap, call it, a framework or a mental model. But this, to me, at least, is a point of departure for how we will articulate how it is that we operationalize the warrior ethos, right? So just kind of orient people to it. We use the same, mind, body, and soul concepts at the top. That's, I'll say, overarching thematic. Below the cut line, right, we've broken it out a little bit farther. So we talk about motivation and commitment, because without motivation, you've got nothing, right? You can have all the ability in the world, you can have all the know-how in the world, but if you're not motivated to take action, you're not going to do anything, right? So that's one. That's why that's important. Thinking, right? Mindset, focus. That's important as well. Quality of thought, direction. We talked about some of the cognitive behavioral aspects, some of the cognitive distortions that really muddy your thinking, right?
Right.
That's on the low end. On the high end, we can talk about intellectual standards from the Command and General Staff College, so precision, relevance, so speaks to the quality of your thinking, right? And I think that's very important as well. But mindset and focus, right? And a variety of, I'll say, mental models and tools that you can use to, again, dial in your thinking, motivate yourself, all of that. So after that, I'll say energy, right? Fitness. And I grappled with, quite frankly, and we discussed this, previously, while I feel very strongly that this approach, I'll say this rubric and model is very effective. I mean, we have 7+ years, right? And 58, now going on 59 cohorts of veterans and first responders that have benefited from many facets of this. So I feel strongly that this approach is, evidence-based,
right, backed
by science. I know we've mentioned that one APA article, right? So that came out in, an American Psychological Association article. So, hey, that data set shows not only does it explicate the approach and kind of lay it out, but it shows that it is in fact, effective and has had great outcomes. So with that said, I feel strongly that, that this approach, or at least what it is that we're teeing up here in terms of that model is sound. But to be fair, in terms of what comes first, is it linear? Is it cyclical? Is it, that's what I grapple with. So I've got motivation first with the notion that without that, you're really not going to do much of anything, right? And then thinking, because going back to cognitive behavioral therapy, right? Your thoughts drive your emotions, which drive your actions. So if you use that rubric, thinking drives everything. And if your quality of thought or your thinking is in error, your emotions, your actions are also going to be in error, which is another reason why I put that there as well. But that's not discounting the criticality of energy and tending the body, because you could also make the argument that if you're flat, you've got no energy, you don't want to do anything, you can't focus, you can't even motivate yourself to do any of this stuff. Now, all that to say, for the sake of argument and making progress, I've put it third behind the others. But bottom line, those self-care practices that we mentioned earlier today, or in this episode, without that, you don't have the the vigor, the zest, as they say, to take on life's challenges. So there's that self-efficacy, right? And that's really just being effective and knowing that you can be effective, right? And for our part, what we talk about is managing your schedule, setting goals, objectives, habits, algorithms, right? So when we say habits and algorithms, what is that? System 1 or system 2?
You're right. Yes. System 1 is going to be more of a habit-based thing.
That's exactly it.
And I don't really have to think hard about that kind of stuff. It just sort of happens.
That's exactly it. So part of being effective is setting those habits, right? Getting those habits to start the day. So what's interesting about that portion of this rubric is, in the beginning, hey, you wire in those critical habits that are just routine, right? So they're on autopilot, boom. But then the second portion of that is setting objectives, setting clear goals, managing your calendar and your time to be effective. And that's system 2, right? So you've got to employ both systems. System 1 is, and for those that, are unfamiliar with those concepts, that's in a previous lesson, in the previous episode, I should say, in the previous season. And we all talk about Daniel Kahneman's thinking fast and slow and his system 1 and system 2 construct. But that's important as well, because without that, you're not effective, right? You are not effective and you're not achieving your goals. So when we talk about, being effective, you're not. So now relationships, we say he conquers who conquers himself. And, the notion there is that you've got to do your own work, because if you're not, I'll say, centered and self-regulated, you're not coming into any situation, optimally, right? So take care of yourself first, do your own work. Relationships, though, are, a next step, obviously. So, cater for yourself first, then others, we say organizations, right? Groups, tribe. I'll say, suffice it to say, in the end, the concept of tribe and everything that we continue to accentuate with the warrior ethos and the values and all of that, as we said early and up front, is if you're not surrounding yourself with people that share the same values, I'm not going to say the same philosophy. I mean, people are different, variety is the spice of life. But if you're surrounding yourself with people whose value system is diametrically opposed to your own, that's not good. That's toxic. And they say what you are the average of the 5 people that you spend the most time with. So make those 5 people count, right? So there's that as well. So relationships are belongingness, feeling valued is very important as well. Yeah. And the last one is, I think, self-actualization, right? So we've mentioned that before, but character virtues, narrative, and contribution. So we talked about Maslow, right? Mm-hmm. What one can be, one must be, and self-actualization is at the top of his hierarchy of needs. That's really important, especially when people leave their jobs, when they retire, and they're no longer CW4, right. Lieutenant Colonel, whatever. And now they're like, well, what is my contribution? What is my value? How am I going to be self-actualized? What is it that I'm going to do? What is the value that I add? So it's really important to have that dialed in as well. And some of the constructs, again, operationalizing that, a mission statement, a vision, goals for, certain facets of your life, organizations that you might belong to, what is I'll say your personal value proposition as an example, what is it that you're contributing to the world? What is it that you do that, arguably no one else can do? No one else can be, a father to your kids, husband to your wife, et cetera, et cetera. So these are all things, no epiphanies here, but these are all things that with the warrior operating system and that framework, we're inviting people's attention to say, hey, this is important. And you may not realize it, like with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, it's everyone's fixated on food, water, shelter, protection, security. Got it. Yes. But all of those have mostly been catered for most, especially in, America. So why is it that people are anxious or unfulfilled, a high state of anxiety? I would submit to you it's that self-actualization piece, or maybe it's belongingness in relationships. It's a variety of things. But if you don't have a means of kind of diagnosing and saying, hey, these are the things that are known to be very important for us, human flourishing, and I need to pay attention to that, one. And number two, quoting Drucker, right, that which is measured is managed. If you're not measuring it, if you're not taking inventory of that in your life and how you're performing in those areas, you're not going to get a good assessment as to whether or not you're catering for all of that. And exactly. I think the warrior operating system kind of brings that to light.
That's nice.
It's like a dashboard. So, yeah.
It gives you a way to evaluate how you're doing against what do you call it? An evidence-based model that's 7 years long.
And
longer actually in other data sets.
Absolutely. And they're again, facets of it, the cognitive behavioral, the self-care, the tribe, the belonging. We see that again and again. And we've talked about this as well. It's, it's a model grounded in science and research, no doubt. But at the same time, there is a bit of anecdotal. I mean, we get, from our alum, hey, what is it about the program or even just the experience that you found to be the most effective? And invariably, they'll bring up some things that, we included, but maybe we didn't think that they were, formative or absolutely integral. And you'd be surprised. And it's different for different people. Some people, the diet is a big thing, because it cured their energy, and their focus, and they'd not paid attention to that. And because we made them do it, they're like, oh my God, I didn't realize I could feel so good. And you're like, diet's important, but of all the things that we showed you, that was like, one of the game changers. And yeah it is. For others, it's CBT. For others, it's yoga, and meditation, yoga nidra to get a good night's sleep. For others, it's just, hey, being with my brothers or being with my sisters and
knowing other people
being
feel the
heard
same.
and understood and no longer isolated. So that's the other thing. It's holistic in that it covers, I'm not going to say all the bases, but a lot of the bases, because you never know where somebody might be deficient. And I don't mean in a bad way, like, oh, you're deficient, but where maybe that's an area of your life that's lacking. I think it's important to have that very holistic approach and outlook or, framework, whatever you want to call it, such that you can look and say, all right, of all the things in my life, hey, this is where I'm kind of lacking, and this is probably where I need to make some improvements. And then see if, at end state, those outcomes, you're like, all right, I am feeling better, or I am performing at a higher level. But again, to beat this horse to friggin' death without a framework and without cognizance of that, where you can clearly see, all right, hey, these are all the things that I should be doing, you're just guessing.
Yeah.
So any parting thoughts, brother? And then we'll again, we set the stage by saying we're going to use this, for the next couple.
Well, I think it sets the stage for the next episode is about, what we struggle with is making people show up, whether it's at the gym, whether it's at the course, whether it's to do the journaling. So it's that motivation piece, and maybe we got something we can talk about. Motivation.
Yes. Let's do a deep dive on motivation. I think it's super important. Appreciate you, man.
Yeah. Thanks,
Absolutely.
man. Hi, Matt Hastings here, sending a thank you for watching this episode of the Warriors Ascent podcast. We strive to build a community of warriors made up of our nation's veterans and first responders. And to reach as many of those in need as possible, we need your help. Please just smash that like button and comment or share our content. Warriors Ascent is a Kansas City-based nonprofit that aids veterans and first responders with PTS. I went through this effective program and want those that are struggling to find what I found. Check us out on our website at warriorsascent.org.